Thank you, Dr. Raghavan. It's a pleasure welcoming Mr. Erik Charles, Vice President Strategic Marketing at Xactly Corporation to this Thought Leader webinar series session. I also welcome our Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. Muduvine, and Registrar Brigadier, Mr. Rajiv Sethi. Mr. Erik, it is a pleasure sharing with you that under the leadership of our Honorable Vice Chancellor and the Registrar, we have achieved a 44th rank amongst the top 50 universities globally in industry initiatives in the World University with the Real Impact Rankings 2020. And we have also earned the Global QSI Gauge E-Lead certification for e-learning excellence and digitization. IBS Dehradun, which is a part of ICFI University, Dehradun, the business school, has recently been ranked amongst the #1 B schools in the region. Our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. Muduvine, has also been acknowledged with the Vice Chancellor of the Year 2020 award by the state of Uttarakhand. For all my students and the participants, it's a pleasure sharing a brief profile about Mr. Erik Charles. He is an accomplished professional with over 2 decades of experience in marketing, consulting, and product evangelization. Mr. Erik focuses on helping companies drive expansion and growth and brings in a multitude of skills ranging from multinational enterprise firms to small startups, allowing him to craft different models depending on the market, people, and corporate goals. Currently, he is the Vice President of Strategic Marketing at Xactly Corporation, where he works as the company evangelist plus managing events, global marketing, and analyst relations. Mr. Erik serves as a subject matter expert in the area of sales performance management, providing the necessary strategic input for the industry leading messaging, positioning, and future direction. His experience in technology includes several startups, plus positions at Canon, Sun Microsystem, and Apple. Mr. Erik has an extensive consulting and research background and is an early stage investor. He serves as a mentor for emerging companies. We welcome you, sir. It will be a great pleasure for us to hear your views on innovation and startups, challenges, and prospects.
I have one
Over
second.
to Mr. Erik.
Sanjay Mali, I have one second, just I wanted to welcome.
Sure, sir.
Sure,
as
a Vice Chancellor of ICFI University, Dehradun, I welcome Erik Charles, who is there today's webinar on innovation and startups, challenges, and prospects. Now, Erik, I wanted to just inform you that the Government of India has established a center, Institute of Innovation Center. I think you are the first person after establishing the center who will be talking on the innovations and the startups. And we are very grateful that to Dr. Raghavendra Sharma, who is the president of this Institute Innovation Cell, who has taken the initiative to be with you, contacting with you, and you are given a right to us, and we are there today. Once again, on behalf of the ICFI University Dehradun and ICFI Business School, I will thank you for taking time and be with us in the first Institution Innovation Cell, the session which will be taking. Please take forward, please.
Thank you very much, and I'm very honored to be here. I appreciate it, and I was honored by the invitation. When I spoke with Dr. Sharma about this in some of our contacts, I said I'd like to share some experience, some research, and a few other things. And more importantly, as I like to say, the mistakes I have made through the time, and including this concept of, I always say, make new mistakes. You have to keep experimenting to make new mistakes, but the best way to make new mistakes is understand the mistakes others have made before you so you can avoid those. So I'm going to go through some of these slides, and I've shared these with Dr. Sharma with my full permission to share everything in my deck in whatever format you are comfortable with. And part of the reason that I always want to share those is I start with something known as the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And that is that 20 minutes after I finish talking this morning, you'll remember less than 60% of what I covered. This is, overall research. Within an hour after I hang up, we're down to 44%. And at some time tomorrow, maybe you'll remember a third, 6 days later, a quarter, and on. And it's an important thing to remember, but if you make sure one of the things you remember that there was some information and where you can go back and find it is one of the keys. I don't remember everything I've learned, even when I was putting together some of this information to present to the classroom today. I kept on having to remind myself, hold it. I know I read that someplace. Where was it? And I started using search engines and old drives of mine. And I actually just got off the phone with one of my coworkers from one of the companies I'll be talking with, the former chief technology officer at Yopa, Robert Mays. He and I actually were talking. He reminded me, isn't it time for the class? You need to hang up and we'll talk later about this. So we actually had follow-on conversations. So knowing where to go for information is oftentimes just as important as what information to get. And the part of this is we are all making decisions constantly. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to make decisions. That sounds odd, but it's amazing the number of people who are not capable of making a decision. You can give them information, you can give them research, you can give them anything, or even you can sit around, having a cup of tea and thinking, what should we do? And I'm reminded of actually my drill instructor at a point when I was in the military who yelled at me, Charles, do something even if it's wrong. Then we can at least fix it. But doing nothing is going to be failure. He said it much more roughly with some more colorful language, I'll admit, but that is what he suddenly yelled out at me. So I always love to start off with this slide. You have been offered an opportunity to join one of two companies. So this is your first snap decision. You have no time to do additional research. The leaders of both of these companies are quality individuals, smart individuals. They've had some successes, some failures. But the first company is classic business-to-business software. Big enterprise, big ticket sales, lots of money involved, longer sales cycles because you're selling to companies, but very nice payouts, and they need someone to come in. Option number two is business to consumer software, where instead of only targeting a few large companies, the 1,000 largest companies in the world, 5,000 largest companies, you can just start targeting people everywhere, but it's business to consumer. You're not even sure how you'll make money. And, it's a very personalized marketplace. You have to think about different types of how people would access the system. When you're selling business software, you can say, no, we're just going to run this on a Windows platform. You can't change it. Sorry, we do not support Apple. The other one, if you're going after consumers, you have to think about, is it Android? Is it iPhone? Is it, what types of logins and the like, personalized marketplace. And it's also a very highly regulatory environment of option two. So just everybody sit at your desk and pull out a pencil and just write down option one or option two of where, make a decision right now. And you don't get to ask for any additional information because you don't have time. Now that everybody's got this set and you're staring at your decision, decide which one of these companies you went to, because this was a decision I made back in the late 1990s. And I chose business to business software because I like things with a defined return on investment. I like the idea of going after large corporations. I'd spent some time in management consulting. My clients were all large corporations. And I told my old friend, Peter Thiel, I'm not going to come over to PayPal, this little company he was starting up. And, he had going, and he had this partner named Elon Musk. And they were trying to create a digital banking solution that you can read about the stories of it in the book, The PayPal Wars. Now, why do I start with this? I said, learn from my mistakes. Now, actually, Calidus was an excellent company and it has helped me build a fantastic career. But at the same time, sometimes you won't have enough information to make a decision and you're just going to have to go with it. And this is where, if the school teaches negotiations classes, understanding how to be satisfied with the decision, even if you sometimes miss one. So this is also why I sometimes say I'm not a great person to take advice from necessarily on the right thing to do, but at least you know not to do the wrong thing. And so with that, what I want to do is bring you into, I was introduced. You can find me on LinkedIn. Everybody is more than welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Please mention the class when you send it to me, just so that I have that in my mind as I accept it. It sometimes takes me a while to carve through all of those, but I've pretty much been in and out of technology my entire life. I sold software in high school in America. So when I was 16, 17 years old, I was selling software at a shopping mall back when the software came on diskettes in cardboard boxes covered in plastic shrink wrap. I then went off to university at Stanford University, and to keep paying the bills, I worked at the Stanford bookstore selling computers and software again. And then I dropped out to start my first company, the College Software Group. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. I'll talk about how I identified a marketplace, found a need, and went pursuing it. I went back to school for a while after that. Then I left and worked for Apple. I moved to Alaska in the frozen north of America to work, and took a 6-month contract with Apple Computer. Reformatted their educational sales initiatives with the university system and the schools of Alaska. Came back finally, got my degree, and went into management consulting for several years. The great thing about consulting, be it a Cognizant company or Tata or anybody else, is that when even on the smallest project, giving advice to large companies gives you a feel for how a lot of large companies operate. So it's another one of those, if you have the opportunity, go for it. From there, I went to Sun Microsystems. They were one of my clients, and it would also give me a more controlled job. The reason I put these things in parentheses is that entrepreneurship requires understanding your personal motivations, not just the company. Then on to Calidus, then Yopa, who I mentioned. I was talking to the chief technology officer from them today. Then Extend Global, started another company, and I'll cover that. Then I went to the university for a few years. And although I worked for the university, I was always also earning an education and taking additional classes. I was contemplating a PhD at the time. And then on to Mindfire, a small marketing technology company, then up to Canon. You can see this pattern of very large companies and very small companies, each one teaching me something else. Then to Xactly, my current employer, for 4 or 5 years. Then I left and went to another startup company for a bit, and then Xactly called me back, where I still am today. So I'm going to cover a lot of these experiences in this talk as part of the lessons learned. So let's talk about entrepreneurship and where does it start? If you wanted to start a company, how do you do it? And the standard way that everybody likes to talk about it is the garage in the United States. And these are the pictures of where Hewlett-Packard started, Apple Computer started, and Google started. So the green doors is where Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard met as they started creating their first devices in the 1930s. The white door is Apple, where Wozniak and Jobs got together and created the Apple Computer, starting off from the homegrown computer club. And if you're not aware, the reason they named it Apple is because it came before Atari in the phone book, and they wanted to be the first listed in technology companies, because in those days Atari was very powerful for home computers. And finally, Google, where Google headed off after they invented the company while their PhD thesis advisor was overseas and taking a break, and they created it. And I didn't even show Yahoo and a few of the others, but the starting the garage, and it's a Silicon Valley mythology, but there's a truth in there. Why a garage? It's cheap. You can all meet in one room. You hold each other to it and get it done. And you don't waste money on fancy office space or anything like that. One of the companies I've worked with, they all live together. More than once, I've heard of people that have lived together. They rent a house together, and they start it where they all live in the same place. And that way the team keeps working. And what are you trying to do there is you're trying to build a bond. And if you talk to investors, venture capitalists, early stage investors, they're oftentimes more interested in the team than the technology. I'll tell you, I'll take an A-level team with B-level technology ideas over A-level technology and a B-level team. Because if not, I'm going to have to recommend with other board members to replace somebody on the team. And that's not fun, and it can be disruptive to a company. And it's really difficult. So there's the technology beginnings in the garage, but there's another place they start. They can start in friendships through, say, people working together on a newspaper. Now, you might recognize some of these faces. Peter Thiel, who's very well known for Palantir and PayPal. Keith Raboy, who was there. And then he, went on to Square, Open Door, and he's currently a venture capitalist as well. Gideon Yu, Dave Sachs. Those first four are friends of mine, actually. We all worked together at something called the Stanford Review. It was a campus newspaper. We were a bunch of troublemakers. And we have all stayed in touch through these years. We're all still good friends. And then you can see a few others who kept on working at that paper, and it created this syndrome where people keep on coming back to each other and asking advice. One Stanford newspaper created a network. Many of these they're called the PayPal Mafia, because a lot of them were at PayPal early enough, and they took that money and they've been very strong. But even again, Pete, graduated back in '89, Stephen in 2005, but he's got Stephen over there as part of Palantir. So you can see the contacts going on here and how it happens. I mentioned that because not every single, Peter Thiel is not a programmer. He was a philosophy major who went to law school, then worked on Wall Street, came back, at one point was hanging out in my house when he then went, with a fund, and then he was trying to do a hedge fund, and then later did PayPal. So they move around a fair amount, but they all know each other in that connection. And I'm part of this, a small part of this connection. I'm not retired, obviously, but we're doing quite well. And it's an interesting thing. So I want you to think about who are the people that you would want to start a company with, that you'd be willing to move into a garage with them or its equivalency and build a firm together. You would trust them. And that trust is so critical. You would know that they're working hard and they're doing things. Bob Mays, who I was mentioning from JobScore earlier, he's now at JobScore, was at Yopa, same idea. So he and I are old friends. We lived together in college at one point, and I've worked with him a couple times, and I still work with his current firm. Matter of fact, and my son has worked for his company at one point. So that's the team. Never lose sight of how important the team is. And it might not just be for this company, it could be for the next one, because failures are going to be part of the list. So then we get into what are you supposed to actually create? The old example that I heard was pretend you are Bill Gates and you have all the money in the world and you want to solve a problem. Well, you can throw money at it just by hiring somebody. For example, maybe you pick up your telephone to call the electric company because there's problems in your neighborhood and you have to sit there on hold. Well, if you're Bill Gates, you can pay somebody to sit on hold for you. Could you create technology that made it possible? So instead of sitting on hold, they automatically call you back from a computer? Yes, and we have that today. You call into somebody, they say, we have a long wait, but if you press this button, give us your phone number, we'll call you back in 15, 20 minutes. I call that solving the Bill Gates challenge. I don't have to just hire a person. We create technology around it. So is there a value in this in time saved or to the solution? In that case, automatic dial back raises net promoter score, makes for happier customers, and happier customers can result in more revenue from them. Next, after those first two, are you just making an improvement on something else in the marketplace? Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Making a slightly better automobile, slightly better motorcycle, slightly better telephone, slightly better search engine. Yahoo was where everybody went. And it was started on the Stanford servers. And you'll pardon my love of my alma mater. Google did it better. And at some point, somebody might beat Google. They might come up with an even better search engine that doesn't end up with as much noise as I get. So making incremental improvements into the marketplace, and I'm going to talk about that when I talk about Xactly and Calidus, because both of those were incremental improvements in the marketplace, and companies that did quite well and provided great employment for a lot of people and great returns to their investors. And always remember, how are people managing whatever this challenge is today? What does it look like today, and what can it look like in the future? So very high level, just what are you doing? What problem are you going to solve, and what's it worth to people? How do you find holes in the marketplace, though? How do you know that there's a challenge? Well, you can go looking for reports by Gartner or Forrester, or on places like that should be or not PR, apologies, Trust Radius, G2 Crowd, or even Glassdoor. These are all online. Now, Gartner, you have to pay to access. But if you know there's an industry you're interested in, somebody oftentimes makes Gartner reports available. You just have to give up your name and email address to them. If you want to read the Gartner report on sales performance management, which Xactly does, you can go to our website and download it. We're just going to ask for a business email address or an educational address. You can get the same thing. You can get the Forrester report from me. You can get the Ventana report from me. You can also see Trust Radius and G2 Crowd. Now, Trust Radius and G2 Crowd are available to almost anybody. So why would you go there? Look to see what people are saying. They might say, I love this product or this service or this solution, except, and you want to look for that except. What is a major player in the marketplace doing wrong? Because people might just be doing business with them because they don't have any other choice. Okay. And looking at all those reviews and all that information, one, when you start asking for, investor money, investor capital, someone to support you, they're going to want to say, what's your marketplace look like? They'll even want something like a total addressable market. But so you need to be educated regardless when you're presenting to them. But you're also going to say, and what we found was this company's bad at customer service. This company's bad at response rate. This company's user interface is terrible. And this company is hemorrhaging employees. They keep on quitting because of terrible work environment. That's why we think our new company can come in, do it smarter, do it better, do it more with more agility, and beat out established players. And by established players, I mean you can beat Oracle, you can beat SAP, you can beat Microsoft, and you can beat Salesforce. Just naming four of the biggest companies in the technology space. They are all vulnerable in some way at some angle. Because remember, sometimes the market's going to shake out the solutions. I think of digital music. Rob Reed was the founder of Listen.com, an early attempt to legally provide digital music. He failed. Great guy. He has a wonderful TED Talk on the value of digital music, but he failed. Microsoft thought they were so big and powerful they could get everybody to use the Zune. And then Apple came out with iTunes. And everybody thought that would control it all for a while, but then Spotify arrives, and all of a sudden people are no longer buying music. They're just renting it while they listen to it. And Amazon is coming into it. It's going to be fun to see who wins, Amazon versus Apple. And I can listen to Spotify on either device. Early days of private websites was GeoCities, and then MySpace came along. But MySpace, the user interface, really lent itself to more technical people, and Facebook beat it. Instagram came along and made for a better photo following, so Facebook bought them. And why do I have LinkedIn as social media? Well, our work, our personal and work lives have had such an overlap that suddenly LinkedIn is also a social media play. Matter of fact, this talk has been, released and discussed on both LinkedIn and on Facebook, which I find fascinating. And of course, we're all waiting to see what happens with the Android versus the iPhone, iOS phones, or who else will come up. So each one of these, if you just looked at these and thought, could I create something that sits between two places that steals a little bit from here, steals a little bit from there? I don't mean steal code, obviously. I mean steal ideas. So You got to shake out the solution. So let me take you to the first time I started a company. And that was in 1990 in the college software group. In those days, if you were applying to university, you still had to take paper and put it into a typewriter or fill it out by hand with a fountain pen. And I submitted both when I was trying to leave the state of Oklahoma in America and move someplace else. So I thought, hold it, there's some early form-based software with WYSIWYG printing abilities on the early Macintoshes. I think I can duplicate all of the work of a college application, put it onto a diskette, mail it to somebody who's applying to school. They could fill it out, print it out, send it back to the school, or they could mail me the disk. I can print it out, submit it to the school, but then I would also let the student choose to have their application shared with other universities who might be interested in having them. So yes, you're applying to the University of Oregon or Cambridge University or Edinburgh or, or IIT in India, not the one in Chicago where my father went to school. I always laughed the first time I heard IIT. I thought of my father's alma mater. So any one of those. And so I had this whole idea. And now I dropped out of school and I went up to Sand Hill Road in Palo Alto. And Sand Hill Road is where all the venture capitalists were. And I had my business plan and a non-disclosure agreement. And I didn't get anywhere. The venture capitalists of Palo Alto were not funding Stanford dropouts in 1990. There are several of the challenges, and I didn't have anybody I could turn to for advice, which is why I put that bit in italics down there. The toughest thing about being a young entrepreneur is not knowing what you're doing wrong and not having anybody for advice. Nowadays, we have fantastic mentor relationships that you can find, fantastic places with accelerators and the like who will, bring a bunch of companies in and provide the advice. That's one of those things I do. So how did I fail? I looked at it as a labor challenge, not enough of a technology challenge. I was halfway there. I thought I was so special I could get an NDA signed by some of the titans of business, Kleiner Perkins, for example. And I really didn't know how to pitch. So I didn't spend the time learning from other people that knew what they were doing. So that was my first foray. Now, the fun thing is the world has changed a little bit now, and other things I've learned since then, and excuse me, I just have to close the door, has been, understanding my risk profile. I like taking risks. I like rolling the dice, as they say. I actually have 2 solid brass 6-sided die here on my table because I always say that there's a modicum of luck in everything that we do. But I've also learned, and we'll talk about that when we talk about Extend Global, the problems of risk in your investors. Do your investors have the same risk profile you do? Hart and Holmstrom received the Nobel Prize for economics on principal agent theory, talking about risk factors and how much risk they're willing to take and how much leeway they're willing to give the agents, which would be you as the entrepreneur. Now, the other side is I look back to my friend Pete Thiel, and he has the Thiel Fellowship where he pays people to drop out of school and pursue their ideas. And the reason is he put it to, when you drop out of school, if you don't have a family to support and you're not worried about paying your bills, you can 100% focus on your great idea instead of worrying about paying the rent, or do you have a child, or do you have somebody else? And so Peter is really just trying to take advantage of hungry, energetic, young, single people who just want to go create something. And that you can look up the Thiel Fellowship, but it captures that idea of Peter's to understand that risk profile changes over time. So that's the risk side. So let's keep going. Let's talk about money. How do we fund our startup? You go asking for money. And this is a fairly well-known cycle. And I've taken this from, this is actually straight from Wikipedia, but it's a variety of things. You start with angels and friends and family. That's the friends and family funding, FFF. And that's where I've, I was trying with the college software group. I was actually just funding it out of my own pocket, my own credit cards. Angels, then you get to that next person who's willing to invest in a company before any true venture capital firms are in, and then they slowly start providing seed capital, and then you start looking for the venture capitalists, and then you get your, A round, B round, C round, and you can look all of these up in places like TechCrunch and on the Crunchbase if you have access to it, and it works out really well. And they are also the ones, once you start bringing in those venture capitalists, they become your board of directors. And they start telling you what to do, which is the other one. So as each stage as an entrepreneur, as you take in money, you have to give up control of your baby. So if you are so loving of the idea you came up with, realize each time you take money from somebody, you own less of the firm, and you're having somebody else who tells you what to do. And that can be a challenge. And then what happens is, if you're not showing enough progress, it gets harder and harder to raise money. Matt, another friend of mine in the medical device space, I remember being at his house as he was taking a call from his chairman of the board because he needed to raise another round for doing medical testing. And he hangs up the phone at the end of the call, looks at me and says, I just lost another 20% of my company so I could keep it going. He says, my ownership is so small now. I'm going to have to go really big for this to be worth anything. But that was the only way he could pay for all of the work he was doing, was to continue selling a piece of himself and selling a piece of his firm to do it. When I was at Calidus, the co-founders, Andy Sweat and Scott Kitayama, once they started bringing in more and more venture money, eventually the board actually pushed Andy to a different role, Scott to a different role. They hired a CEO, they hired a CTO, they hired a VP of alliances, and they hired a VP of business development. And eventually they hired me, but in a much lower level role. And the co-founders were still there, but they weren't running it anymore. The people that stay running the firms are few and far between, especially technical leads. They oftentimes find themselves pushed to the side in favor of the salesman. The other thing that happens with funding is if you don't show progress, you can run out of money. So Yopa, I mentioned them earlier, it's a really interesting platform. It's a great idea. Again, this is late 90s. We were closing a lot of very interesting companies that no longer exist. The early .com companies, as people were trying to sell stuff online and do more and more online, they were our customers, and we were providing some technology for them. And I'll get to them. But before that, I left Yopa to go to Extend Global. So talking about Extend Global was another one of these great ideas at the time. And they stalled in first gear and on the first customer. So you can see what they were doing. The idea was pre-phone, have some sort of a computing device in every truck that's delivering gasoline. Okay, so filling up the underground tanks of the petrol stations. Now, what happened was they only wanted to target really big companies. There's a lot of small companies that might have needed this technology, but they felt that the only way to do it, because the founders, the investor, had made his money on building a company called Petrolsoft and getting Chevron and Exxon Mobil and British Petroleum to license their technology. So when he funded Extend Global, he said, do the same thing, chase the biggest companies in the world. And I told him, no, let's chase some small ones and prove that our technology works. And we went back and forth and back and forth. And then he signed a deal for some nice offices from another startup that had collapsed. So we got some great space and some desks, because he felt that we didn't need to be in a garage. We should instead just be, meeting in an office every day. And he felt that was important. Well, that started burning through his money, but he didn't want to give up his ownership of the company either. So he wouldn't take some venture capital money. So we got to the point that we got the first customer, and then several of us left while we waited to see if it could ever go live. And unfortunately, September 11th, 2001 made everybody want the tracking software, but the big companies wanted to wait in case the United States Department of Homeland Security would declare a different set of rules that we'd have to follow. Long story about how a great idea, great company, great founders, great thoughts, some pre-existing tech that they're going to modify, couldn't quite get out of first gear with that first customer, ran out of money, and he chose not to take extra. The other one I was mentioning, there we go. Sorry. So that's where we get to. So Yopa, we ran out of cash because even though we had 4 or 5 customers, what did we not have? We didn't have enough revenue to keep it going. And you can see the conversation I had with Sunil Sanghavi, who's now he's at Intel. He does Intel investments. Great guy. I stay in touch with Sunil. But he said at one point, he said, I'm not sure what I can pay you back on, even though, again, I want you to keep on looking at these great technology ideas that can still fail in just the business execution. All right. And then Extend Global, where the single angel investor stalled us out as well. So those are 2 startup companies, good tech, couldn't quite make it. Some of this is due to covenants. So like I said, the covenants are what these investors will put into the company. They say, you have to do the following things if I'm going to keep working with you. And if you can't keep pace with my covenants, I'll stop putting money into it. So be ready for investors to put rules on you. So why do investors want to put rules on you? Why do venture capitalists want the right to veto certain operational decisions? Why do they want to be on the board of directors? Why do they want to be restrictive? Well, it's their money, and they think they know better than you do about where that money should go. And here's the secret. They might, or they might not. You should read Taussig, who was my CEO at Calidus and went off to Threat Metrics and has got another company right now, would say, it is your job to interview your investors just as strong as the investors interview you. What will they bring to you in terms of knowledge in exchange for that cash? And there's covenants. So another round of mistakes made, because what's everybody looking for? I always say they're looking for a liquidity event, right? Airbnb went public, $100 billion company. Xactly went public. Okay. Did quite well off of that. Calidus went public. Later then, Walla Public Company was acquired by SAP. Yopa, we were acquired by XDrive and then acquired by America Online. I was gone at that point. Cake was acquired by Constellation Software. And Xactly is now, I'm now officially under Vista Equity Partners. Now, who do I not have listed here? Extend Global no longer exists anywhere. Mindfire is still going along because that was a different type of company. And one of the things that another one I like to say is what does the leadership team and the board want? If you're interviewing with a company, who are their investors? Are they people that are going to take the company in the direction you want to go to? Because there's a couple types of firms out there. There's ones chasing the liquidity event. They want to go public. They want to get big. They're trying to build a massive firm. Then there's lifestyle firms. We all know lifestyle firms. It's someone that owns a great restaurant down the street. And it's a family-owned restaurant. They make great food. They have no desire to open up a second location. They're just going to keep in that site. You'll find the same thing in technology. And I can think of dozens of companies where they don't have venture capital money. They stopped at the friend and family level. They may have just bootstrapped their company. And what they're trying to do is that, but they're collecting a really nice paycheck for themselves and they're not going anywhere else. Now, that could be really frustrating to you if you're trying to build a career out of all of these things. Understanding where a firm that's hiring you wants to go is very, very important as well, or you can find yourself caught in a trap at a company that's moving along, but not at the aggressive pace that you're seeking. That also means they're not taking the same risks. They're not sticking their neck outs in the same way, etc. Okay. So there's a few things that I just wanted to cover on types of companies and where they're going. So now let's get back to the innovation conversation. What are you going to bring to the market? And really having a feel for that. That's why mission statements do matter. That's why telling people where you're going matters. Okay, Musk said it very, very well. People work better if they know what the goal is and why it matters. What are they trying to do? He's trying to go to the Mars. I think that's great. What an amazing goal. He's boring holes underneath the city of Los Angeles, just north of me. Very interesting. So he obviously has a variety of interests. Okay, people have different goals. You should get up every morning and think, what am I trying to accomplish today? Because then that's going to drive you a little harder. Now, why do you need to drive harder? Well, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're also going to be an innovator. Now, the problem with being an innovator is the innovator's dilemma, and Clayton Christensen covers that in his book. But I've always felt that Sir Edmund Hillary and, more importantly, Tenzing Norgay are the ones that matter. 1953, they summit Everest. They were the first. 4 others would follow in the 1950s. And then I just covered a few of the decades here. The next decade, we went from 5 summits to 18 people summiting. Decade after that, 78. Decade after that, 180. In the 90s, over 900 people summited Everest. Why? Because Tenzing Norgay dragged Edmund Hillary up the top and proved that it was possible. In any space, there is somebody doing something that they have now proven that it is possible. Think of SaaS software, software as a service. If I go back long enough, we called it, application service providers, ASPs. And we were just beginning to talk about 3-tier architecture at that time. The idea that you could have a server in one place and you could access it through a different interface and do everything you needed. Salesforce, though, really proved it was possible. And then they have stayed ahead of the game by buying companies and continuing to innovate. And that has been interesting. So, and the cool thing is you can look out, if you see somebody else that's climbed a mountain, it's possible to climb that mountain. Now, the question is, can that innovator see the next mountain to climb another one or not? Or can you get past them now knowing it's possible? Everything is easier once we know it's possible. The 4-minute mile was deemed to be impossible until somebody ran a 4-minute mile. The sound barrier was deemed to be impossible until Chuck Yeager, who just passed away, broke it. And each one of these happens. So you need to be doing that. If you're the innovator, someone's going to see you succeed. They're going to chase you. If you're chasing somebody, you can look to where somebody has succeeded and you can chase them and do it too, and do it faster and better. My example is incentive compensation management software. This is where, as I mentioned, and you saw in my flow, I've spent a fair amount of my career going and covering things. So I've got the Gartner definition of incentive compensation management over here to the left. Okay. And if I go back to the 1980s, calculating a sales rep's commission check was either some custom software somebody built or Microsoft Excel. That was pretty much how it was done. Then in the 1990s, you kind of had a platform play with Trilogy and then Oracle. Oracle still has a product, Oracle Incentive Compensation. It's more of a platform, required a lot of services to get it up and running. And along came Callidus. And Callidus said, we're going to build this in some on-premise software that'll take care of everything for you, but it's custom built. So it's less of a customization for you. Instead, we've customized the technology for this problem, which means we can sell it over and over and over again. Then you hit the 2000s, you see an explosion, including a little company called Xactly, my current employer. And here's what happened. See, in phase 1, as I said, we had all these custom solutions going on. In phase 2, we had the dedicated on-premise. And at that point, SaaS had come out. And our CEO was in the offices of Salesforce trying to sell them phase 2 on-premise software. And Steve Cakebread, the CFO of Salesforce, told Chris Cabrera, my CEO nowadays, at the time he was VP Worldwide Operations at Callidus, I'm not buying on-premise software. Come back when it's SaaS. Chris pushed back and said, if I bring you a SaaS solution, will you buy it? He said, yes. As a matter of fact, we'll invest in the company. So both Steve Cakebread directly and Salesforce invested and Xactly was founded because Calidus didn't think that SaaS was the future in those days. They later became Calidus Cloud, so they changed their mind. And so then you had the SaaS companies come out on private clouds. And where are we today? Like, I'm calling it phase 4, SaaS on public clouds. You're on AWS, Azure, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, and others. I think of those top 3 off my head. What are they doing? They're all providing faster ways to develop products, faster ways to have access to other technology, faster code bases, better, easier access to certain data structures and the like. So you can crank out a SaaS solution on their cloud a lot quicker. And then we can look at the shakedowns. That's the Gartner Magic Quadrant, the last one that'll ever be published for our space. And there's Vericent, who was bought by IBM and then is back out independent. There's Xactly, my company. There's SAP, who bought Calidus, plus Anaplan, Oracle, and Optimize up there in the Leaders Quadrant, and some other smaller companies as well. Why do I show the small companies? Innovator's Dilemma. Performio, the niche player down there. Performio is out of Australia. They looked at this space and they said, we can do this better. We can do this faster. We can do this cheaper. And then, so they have come into the space and they are competing with us. Why? Because Oracle and Xactly and Calidus all showed it was possible, all showed there's good money to be made. And then someone started looking at our reviews and saying, yeah, but you've got these challenges, or you're 15 years old, or what's your code base? And they came chasing us to see if they could push us a little bit harder. So think about that. This is also why I told you to take a look at those different analyst reports so you can download them, read them, and understand them and see where they are so you can see what part of the marketplace to pursue. So the last thing I'm going to bring you into is, what is your role in the company? What do you bring to the table? And it can be anything. I'm considered a subject matter and incentive compensation. I designed incentive plans when I was in management consulting. I ran incentive plans at Sun Microsystems. I helped develop the Calidus products, and I work for Xactly. So I've spent a lot of time on incentives and sales operations. I've sold things myself. I've been in sales. I'm also in marketing, and I understand what motivates people. That's my role. I haven't written code since the 1980s, but I understand how code works. I understand, the basics. I mean, I was into C++, never learned Java, never learned anything beyond that. So you can make fun of me, those of you that are good programmers. So I was Lisp and Prolog and even Pascal and Basic, and then C++. And then I realized there was a different direction. You also need financial types, right? And you need partners. And I bring up partners because I think this is critical for, especially given the school that I'm speaking with, because India has had some amazing innovation coming out of India, but there's still that perspective of India, of course, as a place to offshore, outsource, and leverage for development. And there's 2 different ways you offshore or leverage, development. I love calling it offshore because it's a very arrogant US centric way of putting it. And I apologize, but I prefer to bring it up. Is what is your role as an offshore resource or a valued partner? And at Xactly, our co-founder is Satish Pallavi. And Satish built up, started the company in San Jose. He moved to India and drove our Indian team, and they work for Xactly. They owned equity in Xactly when we were a publicly traded company. They were part of the firm. We didn't treat them as an offshore. We treated them as part of the firm. And we travel to Bangalore, where our offices are there, and talk to them regularly. I get on the phone calls with them. We celebrate the holidays with them. And they are part of the family. At Mindfire, it was Dr. Ko in Thailand and a job scorer working out of Brazil. Why these 3 different places? Well, because at Mindfire, we had a founder who was friends with a developer out of Thailand, so it worked out. At JobScore, the co-founder is Brazilian, so he knows a team down in Brazil. Another company I did work with, they worked with Armenian developers because their chief technology officer was Armenian. So each one of these were very personal contacts. So my entire experience is being able to leverage those personal contacts to make it work. But then the same thing is like, make sure that you understand how that works, though, and what it looks like to make sure they truly are the partners for everything. Last I wanted to bring up is sales. And I did want to take this, now that we're down to the last few minutes, and I'll switch over so I can see the chat window. And if there's anything to go back to, the faculty can drive me back on any part of the conversation. But I always remember, never forget the sales team. No matter how good your product is, if nobody sells it or markets it, it's not going to go anywhere. There are superior products that have lost in the marketplace because they didn't have anybody good that could actually talk about it. I love engineers. I love programmers. They're geniuses and smarter than I am in many, many ways. But sometimes you have to convince other business buyers to buy it or other people to license it and use it. So even, the greatest gamers can create a game, but if they create it with their own internal knowledge without understanding how it might be used by others who aren't identical to them, it's important. And that's where persona-based marketing, persona-based development comes into play. Are you going to make something for the sales tech stack? Okay. Are you going to compete with a Sales Loft or a Marketo or a Pardot, which is now owned by Salesforce? Are you going to compete with Salesforce themselves? Are you going to be on their app exchange? Well, if you are, you're going to be selling to sales operations professionals or to salespeople. If you're selling marketing technology, you're going to sell to somebody like me. If you're competing with Anaplan, you're going to be selling to finance. So in each one of those, you need somebody who understands the marketplace you're selling into so that you can actually move product and make some money. And this is from a deck of mine, and these are the stereotypes of coming across it, of prospectors who help find companies to sell into, hunters whose entire job is to go in to prospects identified by the prospectors and close business, specialists who are sales engineers who can describe the value of the product and answer the hard questions, the harder technical questions, and farmers, those account managers. We live in a subscription economy world nowadays, as the company Zora puts it. Zora is a financial services technology that is used to constantly bill people for using their business-to-business software. And Zora talks about the subscription economy, and we're all in it. You don't buy Xactly software, you license it on a monthly basis. Salesforce, you license it on a monthly basis. Toyota, the CTO of Toyota America, Zach Hicks, is working on ways that you can license your rights to always be driving a new Toyota car. Think about it. If you could just swap out the car every 6 months, you probably do it before the tires even wear out. And you're going to start seeing that. My iPhone, I'm on a subscription plan with Apple, so I can always get the latest one. It makes sense for me. It's what I like to do. Each one of these roles in your sales organization is important. It's not that you need them on day one or even day 365, but at some point, as a founder entrepreneur, you'll have to be ready to let go and let somebody else talk about your product and let somebody else get out there and convince people to license or use the product. That's when you need sales. That's when you need marketing. Don't forget about that in your business plan, because the buyers in the marketplace, unfortunately, aren't always smart enough to come out and realize just how good you've done it. So again, my name is Erik Charles. Very easy to find, ErikCharles, and you'll find me on LinkedIn. I'm lightly on Twitter at times. And at this point, I believe we have some time for some questions. I tried to leave at least 5 minutes in case there are any questions.
Any participants, if you have any questions? That was a nice presentation, Sergey. It was fantastic, excellent. It was very enriching experience for all of us. So if you have any question, you please raise your hand, students, or anybody, any participants probably. Cedric, we are more than 200. Now I think we are.
Oh my goodness.
More than 200. Okay, so you can raise your hand probably. We will invite you your question probably. Okay.
or type something into chat would be fine if that makes people more comfortable.
Akhilesh, did you allow the participants to write in the chat box?
Mr. Eric, it was a wonderful presentation from your side. Thanks to you.
My pleasure. Do you have
By
any
the
leading
time
questions you want to hit me with? Did I try? I always like to say to my faculty partners, did I look like I was going to, if like I cheated by not discussing something that could be embarrassing? I'm happy to take the embarrassing questions.
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, you very well explained not only innovations, but also how to go about the startup. So before one of the participants raises a question, I'm just filling it, sir. These are all freshers. Most of the MBA students we have are freshers. So any two tips or maybe a couple of tips you want to give it to them to be the entrepreneurs or to be to improve their innovation skills when they are working with an organization? So any couple of tips?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. My favorite is always there has to be a better way. It's always thinking there has to be a better way to do this. And there's different aspects of that it could be I just saw that for my phone, someone now has a magnet that will hold it on my auto dashboard and charge it simultaneously. All right. Which doesn't sound like much, but given how many times I've dropped my phone between the driver's, between the seat and the side, what a great idea. There has to be a better way. Things that can make things just a tiny, never forget the value of a minor incremental improvement in things that nobody was thinking about having music on their phone. I mean, it's so stereotypical to use Jobs and Apple, but it works, but nobody was necessarily thinking about that. And even think back to the very early days of Apple, they saw the mouse go into an icon at Xerox PARC, and they productized it, and they built something, and then they later would have a computer that didn't even have a disk drive because they said the market's not smart enough to know. That's a little edgy and dangerous, but for so many things, there's a better way. So like when I see the question, what's my biggest source of inspiration for building a startup? It's I listen to people and they come in to say, I'm trying to do this. I'm like, oh, you're right. JobScore's applicant tracking system was built with artificial intelligence to skim people's resumes to make it easier to do searches for job candidates. And then they made the user interface very simple so we could go to small companies that didn't have full-time recruiters working in human resources. So it wasn't that applicant tracking systems didn't exist, but they said there has to be a better way. And that's the way so many of these, and again, I think of from the business to business, but even payments. I mean, I think of PayPal showed that we could do payments off of our phone. Now I can do it with PayPal. I can do it with Zelle. I can do it, with Venmo. I pay my son's fencing tutor using Venmo, and things like that. And that has changed things. And I'm waiting for somebody else to come up with a slightly better way than theirs. So keep on looking, and where are those pockets of, think of something you're like, the year is 2020. Why are we still doing it this way? And can we find a way to do it? That's my personal inspiration.
Mr. Eric, I don't know what is the scenario over there in America, but in India, majority of the startups, they got failed within 1 year of its inception. Really, what reason could come out to me, it's not because of the idea, maybe it is because of the mismanagement of funds or scarcity of funds. So scarcity of fund and mismanagement of fund, on these two aspects, what you would like to suggest to the future innovators?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So the venture capital and the scarcity of funds issue, I mean, that's why a lot of the companies get started where you use your own money and you try and show a little bit where you can go into the venture capital, say, we've already succeeded in going this far with our money. And if we had a lot more money, we could go even further. Being able to have that, I always say like in business to business software, it's all about the first 1 to 5 customers that are your proof points that someone is willing to pay something for your product. That's how you can convince somebody else to invest in it. And it's interesting. I think COVID has changed the mindset about where people work, and we're going to see more and more investor dollars available in different places. And I think to make sure I'm interpreting your question right. I have a friend, Trevor Loy, has a venture capital fund in the state of New Mexico. There's not a lot of things in New Mexico in the United States. Okay. But he's there because Trevor's statement is he likes to fish where nobody else is fishing. And that's where he says, I can get better catches that way. Even where I live in Southern California and Orange County, the venture capital community is only now starting to grow. But I think with COVID, as more and more venture capitalists themselves have moved to new places, Cognizant has an office in Montana. I want you to think about that. Cognizant is in the state of Montana, not New York. I'm sure they're in New York and California as well, but they bought a company called ATG in Montana. Why Montana? Why not? And I think we're going to see the same thing coming to India. There's going to be venture capitalists who are saying, why are we not investing in India? Why do I keep on going with companies that have Indian engineers and Indian programmers and Indian people running it? I expect, actually, there's got to be a directory. You've now driven me, and I'm not going to go to bed until I do some research to see how much venture capital is available now in India.
That's great. There are many students, Rick, who would like to get into the export and import area. So what precautions they should take into consideration before they start coming with their ventures?
I'll go back to that risk profile. So in the one of the things I didn't cover, but I've discussed in the past is I have been on the dole 4 different times because my company's shut down or I have been laid off because they couldn't afford to keep me on the payroll. So I always say, make sure you have enough money to not make any money for a while if you take that risk. And that's possibly one of the toughest things. For me, it's addicting. It's very addicting. I love risk. I snow ski. I climb mountains. I won't do Everest, admittedly, but I do rock climbing. I do a variety of, I walk with a limp because of a motorcycle accident. But you have to be willing to accept a certain amount of risk to be an entrepreneur and accept the risk that you might not have a job. They can disappear quickly and easily. And if you're not comfortable with it, then it might not be but I'll also say, and maybe this is the value in the first follower is also there. So if you're not ready to take the risk purely yourself, but you're willing to be one of the first 20 employees, you can get a taste of it and have a lot of fun. And being the follower of that lead entrepreneur, I would have happily worked for Steve Jobs. And and there's horror stories about him, as we know, but the idea of working for him or an Elon Musk or the like is out there. And sometimes even being somebody who follows along on one of those, I've worked with Chris Cabrera now twice at Calidus and at Xactly. And honestly, if he went and started another company the next time, I'd probably follow him. Adam Nash is another name. Adam's about to start his third. He was head of product at LinkedIn, and then he started Wealthfront, and now he's starting another financial services company. So you can also find those serial entrepreneurs who know a space and hitch your wagon to there and still get that entrepreneurial feeling until you're either ready to do it yourself or realize, no, I'm happy to let somebody else lay the initial groundwork, but I'm still will happily work for a company with only 20, 30 employees that's still right on the bleeding edge.
That's great. That's great. If there are other questions, probably you can write them to me on my mail so we can take it forward maybe later if Mr. Erik is available, because it is a little 2 minutes over. So we would like to, Dr. Malvi, it's over to you.
Yes, sir.
Shall we sum it up? Dr.
Mr.
Malvi,
Erik,
am I audible?
yes, you are audible. You were saying something.
Or if you have any questions, you can ask. Maybe we can conclude
Okay,
the question.
okay. I have plenty of questions. I was waiting for the students to ask, but it's okay. You get these chances very rarely, Mr. Erik. Sitting almost on the other side of the globe, and we are interacting. It's a pleasure. I just wanted to ask. You mentioned one thing, Dr. Raghavendra also pointed out. In India, we find it difficult at times to have successful startups beyond a year or a couple of years. So that is a serious challenge which is there. You were mentioning something about I feel, that is my feeling, that these startups fail because we don't make a right choice in terms of the investors who are going to, if we need funds beyond friends and families. So at times we falter around picking up the right investors for our startups. So and you were also mentioning it, how do you take a decision on whether the investor for our startup is the right one? Or you mentioned that you need to interview the investors. So how do you go about it?
Well, in the same way they look at my resume and see where I've worked, I like to look at their resume and see who they've invested in and if they've had any successful exits, liquidity events themselves. Where have they been themselves? If not, because I want somebody who's actually done it before. Raj Jain was a college friend of mine, started a company called Quintana and made it very successful. He didn't take investor dollars until almost the very end, and he actually brought in investors. He didn't need the money, but they became his board of directors and helped him sell the company. But he made them buy in, but he had to give up some of it, but he made them buy in, but then they became his board to help him sell. And since then he has gone back and he's actually brought in now to companies to kind of clean them up to be able to sell them over time. And so Raj does a great job with that. Plus he's a very good poker player. Don't play poker with Raj Jain, or at least my friend Raj Jain. So, but interviewing the investors of what are their successful exits is going to be important. And what's their long-term view of it? Are they going to do more than one investment or just the one? Oftentimes you'll see some investors in the venture capital, especially community, will come in, but they want somebody else to be the lead. So if they see this company is investing, I'm willing to invest as well. And so you can look for those patterns where it seems like, wow, these three firms all seem to have a piece of the same companies on a regular basis. They're chasing each other. It's like fast food restaurants all showing up on the same marketplace because they've all figured out that that's where a lot of foot traffic is. And so looking for those patterns in the investing public. And then what I would be interested in knowing, like I mentioned, Intel Ventures exists. That's where Sunil went and Pradeep was as well from Yopa. They're both back. Intel has an investment arm. Salesforce has an investment arm. And they'll invest in interesting companies. You can take a look at what they've put their money into. I would even in India, I'd be curious if whether or not Tata has an investment arm separate from what they just build themselves, but do they invest in other companies? Because it might just be you need that one next layer of approval that says, no, these people have invested in me to keep the company going as well. But I'll freely admit I'm guessing a little bit here. So like I said, one of our challenges here in Orange County, California, where I live, is we're just now getting enough different venture capital companies so several of them can come in on the same company and help build them up.
Great. Thank you. And,
my pleasure.
And one more question I have, sir. Most of the business thinkers we are listening to, especially in India, they're talking about the next decade, 2021 to 2030, belonging to India. So what is your take on that, sir?
Oh, I won't give you full ownership of it, but I actually believe that there's been so much use of Indian talent in India that there's an entire generation of people that have been trained up on the style of business practices of entrepreneurship that it's just going to take a few that start making it happen. And so instead of and I'm going to even say it, instead of Indians leaving India and coming to America, there's why wouldn't I just stay in India where I can do the same and build it out? And what I see this turning into, remember I put up that partnership slide. I'm waiting for the Indian companies to start reaching out to Americans and saying, we'd like you to be our partner in America to help us sell and market and support our product in the United States or in Europe or in other places next. So I agree. I mean, it's math. It's just simple mathematics. I can look at the number of people that are coming out of the universities of India, the people that are being trained up, the people that know things. Even if I'm only creaming off the top 2% of your graduates, there's more people coming out of the universities in India at that top than we have out of the universities in California. So there's no reason why. And I do think it's just going to take a few more large companies. And like I said, I name a few because I've done business with them. Like I said, that's why I keep on mentioning Tata and Cognizant, because I've done work with them. And I'm sure I'm leaving 20 more off my mental list that are right there in existence. And they're going to start creating that avalanche. So I'm not going to give it up to you for the next decade, but I definitely think you'll be out there and I'll happily be a part of it.
Great. So you agree to it, sir? To a certain extent, yes, this next decade is going to be interesting and exciting for the Indian business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're past India is the cheap place to outsource. India is a place to develop and come with new ideas and start, being the leaders in a variety of the pieces of the marketplace. Yes.
Okay. So any suggestions you like to make to the policymakers?
I haven't even looked at the policy. That's an interesting one. I mean, I'll leave a minor one, and I don't think you have this issue. I was in Montana at a meeting, and someone said, how could Montana get more software companies to relocate here? And I said, well, there's some interesting research that says that California's advantage is the lack of the ability to enforce a non-compete agreement, in that I could leave today and go to a company that competes with Xactly tomorrow, and they can't stop me as long as I don't steal any actual intellectual property. So as long as I'm just taking my brain, I can walk with all my experience across the street. In the state of Florida, they can make me sign an agreement to not do that, but not in the state of California. And they say that is that has been one of California's strengths through the years, is the lack of enforceable non-compete agreements. So I would always say that for India. Then after that, I'd be looking at whatever your tax and finance laws for venture capital investments and the like, but I honestly I have no knowledge of that in India. Usually it's just get out of everybody's way.
I think that will, if these areas are taken care of, that will help to improve the innovation and the startup scenario in India. And the Indian government is also putting a huge thrust on it. We recently have a new education policy after almost 3 decades.
Fantastic. I'll enjoy watching.
Mr. Mike, the government of India bravely, it is also coming up with the new education policy, which is focusing on entrepreneurship and innovation and startups. So the focus is on to foster the young minds, to let them come out, help them, give some sort of hand-holding to them, and policy should also support them so that they can foster their idea. So that's how the new system of investment and entrepreneurship.
I think that's the great idea. Matter of fact, I've got sitting around here the book, Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, which was actually, he didn't write it. It was a series of lectures he gave at Stanford University. And a student there said, well, if I just take all my notes, can we publish it? And it was. So he published a book, and it was just his thoughts on entrepreneurship and starting a company. And the only reason I mention that is that a lot of universities are doing that. They'll now have a class, and they'll actually walk students through the entire path of creating a business plan and trying to launch it and presenting it. And then they bring in investors on the last day of the class, and the class ends with a pitch day. And matter of fact, my son's high school has the same. they have an entrepreneurship class and a pitch day, and I judge it every year. They invite me back over to cover it, and I have students doing pitch days. One of them came up with the ketchup, tomato sauce, and was very successful and sold. And I think he sold the company to somebody else. Finally bought it. It was a pretty interesting spicy ketchup that he came up with. So I talk about technology, but there's a lot of places it can go. So having that sort of a semi-formal class where you get enough of the advisors to come in and it ends in a pitch day, and people start pulling different pieces together and creating companies where the university provides it. Here at the University of California, Irvine, we have an incubator space on the campus where faculty continue to be advisors, and you actually talk about that, and the faculty are allowed to be investors. So there's also a very strong ability of taking technologies developed on the academy, licensing them. The academy still owns a piece of it, and the faculty still own a piece of it. And student entrepreneurs can take it into the marketplace. And there's several, like you said, Google and Yahoo were both started on Stanford servers. And of course, if you're not aware, Sun from Sun Microsystems stands for Stanford University Network.
That's great. That's great. I think, Dr. Malviya, it must be very late, maybe around 10 p.m. For our guest. So I think that we should cover the day for today.
Thank you I wish to say I'm extremely honored to have been invited to present this morning for you. Very, very honored, and I want to thank you for that.
It is our pleasure, Mr. Erik, and your ideas. I'm sure that your ideas, which more than 200 entrepreneurs or future entrepreneurs, probably some of them will become, they were listening to you carefully, and I'm sure that they might have been enriched themselves that what care they should duly take when they are going to coming up with any idea of them. And I'm sure in future, if it is needed, probably we would love to call you, maybe a couple of more interaction with them.
All right. Happy to take the call.
And particularly your suggestions that identifying the focus of these future entrepreneurs should be on identifying the opportunities and to deliver some value, right? To identify the market forces, right? And of course, your idea, better, faster, and cheaper solution of things. So that will be the guiding force for them in the future. So with this, thank you so much, sir. We really would love, if you come in India, we really would love to host you. And before that, we would reconnect with you on maybe a different dimension of startups.
Fantastic. I look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Charles.
Thank you for spending time. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Akhilesh,
Bye.
can you close the meeting? Bye-bye, sir. Akhilesh? Akhilesh?